All right, welcome back, friends. So in this video, we are going to discuss our first main data structure, which is the array. So we're going to try to understand why we use arrays. And, well, just so that you understand, suppose that you're a teacher and you want to create a list of students, right? How can we do that with what we've learned so far? We could say var student 1 is Sheldon, var student 2 is Penny, var student 3 is Leonard, var student 4 is Raj, okay? So that makes every student a string with their own name, like Sheldon, Penny, Leonard, Raj, etc., etc. So I could make a string for student variables, and each one is a separate variable. And if I wanted to add another one, I would just need to save our student 5 is equal to some other name. And then I would need to know for the next one, I need to add student 6, then student 7. See? So this is problematic for several reasons. We'll focus on a few. So one is that this code is, well, certainly not what we would consider dry. There's a lot of repeated code here. Also, these students aren't necessarily related to one another. They're totally separate. So it's not really a group of students. So this is a perfect use case scenario for an array. With an array, we can group any data like this. So rather than having 4 separate variables, we can write one variable, and inside of it, we can store 4 different names. All right, so that's why arrays are really, really useful. So let's create our first array. I'll say var students equals and then square brackets. So these brackets are things which tells JavaScript this is an array. Up until this point here, we're dealing with just regular JavaScript variables, where on the right side, we could just have a string or a number or Boolean or undefined or no. But instead of a variable, now we have an array. So these square brackets define that this variable is an array. You can see the opening bracket and closing bracket, and inside of it, we have our list of data to declare an array. So it's going to be a list, which is separated by commas. So this is just one method to create an array. Cool. And we're going to see a second method as well. But let's continue with this. Inside this array, we'll write our values elements. So I'll say Sheldon, Leonard, Penny, Raj. At the moment, we created an array with 4 elements. And this is a data structure, not a variable. And the second important point about arrays is that they are indexed just like characters in a string, where there is a specific number that corresponds to every character starting at 0. Arrays are also indexed starting at 0. So yeah, every slot in this array has a corresponding number. I mean, every element has an index number. So if I write them down here, I'll say Sheldon equal index 0. Leonard index 1. Penny index 2. Raj index 3. Okay, so this is how the array is created in memory in the background. Every element spot is obvious. So we have Sheldon stored with a number 0 as its index, and the others, okay? So we use those array indices all the time to get data out of the array. So if we do want to call an element from an array, we just use the index. Now, if I want to reach Sheldon out of the array, I do need to know the index that corresponds to Sheldon. And in this case, as we saw here, Sheldon's index is 0. Then all we need to do to reach Sheldon is writing students, which is the array name and the bracket. And inside of this bracket, we're going to write Sheldon's index. So 0. So student 0 is going to give me Sheldon. Now to see, first of all, here I can say console.log student. And down here, I'll say console.log, and inside of it, students 0. So now I can save all this, go to console. And here we see our array and the first element of our array. And if we return our code, how did I reach the first element of the array? I write the name of the array and then the index of the element that I want to reach. Okay, we can also use the indexes to update array values. So, if I want to change the first value of the array, first I'll need to reach that value just like we did here. So I'll say students and 0 inside the brackets. And so I get the first value, and now I want to change it. So all I need to do is start writing equal, and then the new value, which I'm going to say Amy. Okay, now to see the result, I'll just say console.log and students. And before I go to the console, I want to comment out other console logs. So I comment out all console logs and go to console here, refresh the page, and clean my console. And then I return to the code. Now again, I'll open this last console log. And so what we did here is we got the first value of the array and then manipulated it, right? We changed it to be Amy. So save all this, go to the console. And yeah, sure enough, here we see our manipulated array. So then in our array, we have Amy at index 0. Okay, so now onto our code again. The next feature of arrays is that we can also add data to an existing array. So in addition to manipulating an element in the array with this method, we can also add a new value with this method. So if I got a new student, all I need to do is access students and put an index in here. That doesn't exist yet. So in this case, 4. So if I say students 4 equals Howard, and at the moment we add Howard to be index 4. So now down here again, I'll write console.log students. And in our console, we're going to see our 2 arrays. So I'll save all this, go to the console, refresh the page, and there it is. We see our 2 arrays, and in our last array, we added a new value, Howard. Okay, so now let's return to the code. One quick note, if I do something like students of 7 is equal to John, and down here I say console.log students again. Save this, go to the console. And now let's take a look at what students looks like. So now you can see that I get Amy, Leonard, Penny, Raj, Howard, and then it shows empty times 2 and then John. So what do you suppose happened here? Well, I added John as an index of 7. And that leaves us with a lot of blank space between index 4 and index 7. So JavaScript just makes empty spaces there and fills it with undefined. So now there's a bunch of empty space in this array, which is not ideal, as you might assume. So in the next video, I'm going to show you another way of adding data where we don't have to keep track of how many items there are in our array at any given time to wrap it up. All right? But for now, let's go on with another point about arrays. Remember I said that there are different ways of defining arrays? Sure, so the first is to define an empty array using square brackets. So I say var cats, and then square brackets. So it's just an empty array. The other way to define an array that you may come across is to write new array with a capital A and parenthesis after it. So I'll say var cats equal and new, and this new is another keyword in JavaScript, just like return. Then I write array with a capital A and parentheses. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about what this is right now, but just think of it as a function. I mean, it is a function, right? We're calling it with parentheses. That makes us a new array, just like this one does. All right, so I'd say that these are equivalent in both cases. So now I'll just comment out these, okay? So up until this point, we store only strings in our array, but arrays can hold any type of data. So you've only seen them so far with strings like Amy and Penny, but we can fill them with numbers, with booleans, with no, undefined, with strings, with other arrays. Okay, we're going to look at that a little bit later. In other words, we can fill arrays with all sorts of data, and they don't have to all be of one type. For instance, let's create an array. So I'll say var common data and then square brackets. Now inside of it, I'll say John, which is a string, is its first element, and the second element can be a number, so I'll say 25. Third element is Boolean, true, and fourth is null. Okay, so what I mean is that we can store all sorts of data in one array at the same time. And we can reach all the elements, just like we saw. So I'll say common data and 1, so I reach 25. Okay, another feature of an array is that the arrays have a length property. All right, so I'm going to make another array here. I'll say var cars, and the first element is Mercedes, then Audi, then BMW, and the last element is Volvo. So we've defined an array with 4 elements. Now we can reach the length of this array. And I want to store that in a variable, so down here I'll say var cars length and equal cars.length. Okay? Now we can reach the length of our array just like this. So now I'll say console.log and cars length. I'll save this, go to my console. And here, when I refresh the page, we see 4, which is the length of our array. And remember that the highest index in this array is always 1 less than the length. I want you to remember that. That's an important point. Okay? So we're going to take a quick break right here and continue in the next section.